the kind of interesting things that happened with that. When I came back, the Lord just touched my heart, and I made a commitment, and I told a couple guys there, I want you to hold me accountable on this commitment I'm making, because I knew it would be hard for me, and that was that I was going to spend 3 hours every day alone, just me and the Lord, for 3 hours and for 7 days.
Wow.
And
how'd it go?
Well, it went well every day, and I have to be honest, every day except for one day, I was able to keep the commitment. I missed it by 30 minutes that one day. But by the way, the day that I missed it was the day that I was going to church and stuff. That threw me off, Pastor. Church just messed up my whole deal. But anyway, what really I discovered was I had plenty of time to do that. And it goes back to something that you were teaching on a little earlier today, and that was priorities. Because what I found was, first of all, I would spend an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening. And, I already spend about 45 minutes every morning alone with the Lord in my quiet time. But I just extended that for another 45 minutes and said, hey, there's some things that can wait 45 minutes. And I did that. And then what I did was I found in the evenings it was not a big deal, because most of my time in the evenings is Fox News or CNN or one of those deals, And so I found that, hey, there's some things more fruitful that I can be doing with my time, and that rearranging those priorities was really helpful. And I don't believe that, and maybe the Lord will call me for the rest of my life to do that, but as far as I could tell, that's not what I'm going to do. But the Lord drove a point into my heart, and that is to look at my schedule. Just to take a tough look at my schedule.
And that's always challenging to do, because a leader has lots of demands. There's all these things that are crying for attention, and to be able to prioritize the time alone. The other thing, Sammy, that I think is so important in a leader is to let that time alone be enjoyable. I think sometimes we get caught in this duty, that we've got to do this, rather than the joy of we get to do this. That's like if you're with Tex and say, well, I've got to spend time with Tex. Nuts. Wished I could go fishing or do something else. Well, that's not the way your relationship with Tex is. You love those times together. And that's the way it needs to be in our walk with the Lord. That it's not as much about regimentation and duty as much as it's about the joy of intimacy. Right. And spending that time in the language that you communicate with him. For me, it's worship. I love putting on a headphone, listening to worship, jumping into the Word, and praying and finding that language.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason the Lord spoke to Mark 7 days. Because if you make that, if I say, okay, 3 hours every day, that's what I'm saying, then it becomes legalism. Yeah. And that's not what God wants. He wants me to be with him. That's what renewal is about. I mean, exactly 1 minute in the presence of the Lord will renew you. 30 seconds. You come into his presence, and that's renewing. It's not the amount of time, but it's the fact that you've been with him. Okay, so that time alone, that's the first thing.
Well,
what else?
There's a rhythm. Now, this is really important, and I wished I would have learned this when I was younger. There's a rhythm. God created everything with a rhythm. 6 on, 1 off. And he said, that's what I want you to do. And sometimes in ministry, we don't have good rhythm. I know for a fact you struggle in that area. I struggle in that area because we just we just go like crazy, and we're kind of like farmers. And farmers, man, when you got to get the crops in, you just go after it with everything you've got. What happens is God simply said, I want you to have a rhythm. I want you to have a rhythm in your week. I want you to have a rhythm in your day. I want you to have a rhythm in your life. Go hard, rest. Go hard, rest. Sammy,
okay, but now let me just ask you about this, okay? Because now this won't relate to most people, but I got to protect myself here.
Sure.
Okay, it's hard to have a rhythm whenever you're going out there and then you're coming in. My schedule is not like a pastor.
Well,
and yours is not like a pastor's either. Even though you are a pastor.
Do we confess right here?
This is confession time.
Okay.
But okay, it's hard to get a flow going. You go and you stop. You got to turn around, you're in a different setting. Yeah. Then you move into another setting. My schedule gets really screwy.
Hang on though.
Okay.
You came into this conference a couple days early.
Yeah.
Now you did that in a way so that you could get a little bit of a rest, so that you could just hit it hard when you came. That's a rhythm. And you're going to go back. Now, you're coming into a real heavy part of your calendar. In fact, a little too heavy, if I might say so. It's going to be really
Yes, sir.
hard. Okay. But you try to build those rhythms. And, Sammy, you've talked about that even when we worked on your schedule.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to try to take this amount of time, hit X amount of overseas trips, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to rest. And sometimes we can refresh ourselves when we build rhythm into our life. I take 2 weeks every year. My wife and I head down to Mexico with friends. We go fishing. You know what? We can survive some stuff knowing that there's a break coming at some point.
That's
so
because you catch big fish.
that's exactly right. And you did too. There is
Not
that-
as big as yours.
Yeah, but there's a sailfish in
Hey,
your office.
somehow we're getting off the subject.
Okay,
here.
okay. But you know what? Jesus had a rhythm.
Yeah,
And Jesus got a little bit upset with people when they messed with his rhythm.
yeah.
He went across the other side of the lake, said, we've got to pull away. Sometimes, Sammy, in ministry, we feel guilty when we do what is really right. We
Yeah.
feel like, oh, man, I'm failing the people. I'm failing God. There's all these lost people. There's all these needs. Well, if you don't do the rhythm, you're not going to be worth anything to anybody.
You know, I think for me, the most difficult thing, you know, I come to things like this, and I mean, I get pumped. I mean, you know, I get pumped doing these conferences and meeting with my brothers and sisters from countries where it's tough and
Absolutely.
difficult. My problem is I go home and I feel like I feel I have an obligation to my staff to be there for them. You know,
Yeah.
this is confession time.
Sure.
You know, so, but you know that's one of the things I struggle with. And
But
then,
Sammy, lest you're too hard on yourself, one of the things that you've started to do is to try to, when you get off the plane, to give yourself little breathers and run reduced schedules for a little bit of time, at least that's what you told me, so that you could give yourself some recovery. If you understand exercise, physical exercise is all based upon exertion, recovery. Exertion, recovery.
and you become strong and you grow.
That's exactly
and,
right. Well, it's that way for us in ministry.
Right.
The thing that I'm noticing with far too many pastors and leaders is there's no recovery. You know, it's amazing for pastors. Sundays come with amazing regularity. They're
Yeah.
like they're every week.
Yeah.
And our life builds around those, and we don't have the rhythm we need.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you said about guilt and where is really tough, and sometimes that guilt is placed on pastors in particular
Yeah.
from without, you know, and so it's really tough
You
for
know,
guys.
congregations can, bless their hearts, have a way of unconsciously raising expectations for us that are a bit unreasonable. And I think we have to establish boundaries. Now, just like you have a board you work with, and that board tries to establish boundaries, we need to have people who help us to establish boundaries.
You know, and another thing too, though, I remember hearing a couple guys talk about their pastor, and the pastor had been there well over 20 years at the church, and they were talking about, man, his messages just aren't fresh, and I said, man, hey, multiply it out. 20 times 50 is 1,000. Double that's 2,000. You try to speak to the same people 2,000 times, it'd be fresh every single time. I think sometimes people have unrealistic expectations.